2010 was a huge year for Wikileaks and its editor-in-chief, Julian Assange. A mostly unknown website, by the end of the year, it would be labelled the most dangerous in the world. The Iraq War had been going on for 7 years by this point. It was a remote conflict, and for the international coalition, a battle based on optics. From shock and awe to mission accomplished, pictures were streamed across cable news showing Operation Iraqi Freedom live from the battlefront. This was not one of those videos. And a warning, this is hard to watch. In April of 2010, Wikileaks released this video on its website, titled Collateral Murder. It's a recording of a US Apache gun sight as it strafes over Baghdad in 2007. It shows 18 people, including 2 Reuters journalists, walking through a courtyard. The camera being carried by one of the journalists is wrongly identified as a weapon.
That's a weapon, yeah.
The order is given to engage.
Light them all up.
And the helicopter opens fire.
Hey, Roger. Keep shooting.
After the volley of shots, a van pulls up to rescue any survivors before it too is fired upon.
Clear. Come on.
It's a shocking sight and in jarring contrast with what we hear.
Oh yeah, look at that, right through the windshield.
Later, it's revealed the van was carrying 2 children.
Oh, it's their fault for bringing their kids to a battle. That's right.
Reuters, the employer of the 2 journalists, had tried to get a hold of the footage under the Freedom of Information Act, but was denied by the US government.
Namir was 22 years old. Said was 40 years old. Both were much loved. And in an instant, gone. We had no idea what had really happened.
The video WikiLeaks released is highly produced, edited, subtitled, supplemented with eyewitness reports and beginning with a George Orwell quote. It's clearly meant to illustrate a political point of view and not merely to inform. Assange claims to have decrypted and published the video in the interest of transparency. The official military investigation cleared the soldiers in the video of any wrongdoing, stating that the crew acted within the rules of engagement. However, 2 months later, the Army intelligence analyst accused of leaking the footage, Private Chelsea Manning, then known as Bradley Manning, was arrested. But WikiLeaks didn't stop there. That release was in April 2010. In July, they published tens of thousands of secret US military reports about the war in Afghanistan, dubbed the Afghan War Diary, sending copies to major news outlets ahead of the drop. The New York Times called it an unvarnished and grim picture of the Afghan war, and along with the Spiegel and the Guardian as news outlets, unanimous in their belief that there is a justified public interest in the material. Also adding, they have agreed that they would not publish especially sensitive information in the classified material, like the names of the US military's Afghan informants, or information that could create additional security risks for soldiers stationed in Afghanistan. But here's the thing, WikiLeaks made no attempt to redact any of the names of Afghan civilians, putting those who helped coalition forces in danger. It was an issue that drove a wedge between Assange and his WikiLeaks colleagues.
We had this really complicated situation with our 3 collaborating newspapers, the New York Times, Guardian and Der Spiegel, where we found out he made promises about redacting part of that publication, but no work was put into these redactions at all.
This was a secret document dump, laid bare for anyone to see. WikiLeaks made 76,000 pages available on their website, claiming to have withheld an additional 15,000 emails in an effort of harm minimisation. And then, October 2010, the largest leak in US military history. 400,000 classified files on the Iraq War. They detail the atrocities of war, involvement of Iraqi security forces in the torture of prisoners of war, document higher civilian death tolls, and describe Iran's support for Iraqi insurgents. Again, the release organised by Assange for maximum effect, granting access to select media outlets ahead of time, and then orchestrating a media frenzy to accompany the release online.
It really is the most extraordinary compendium of war that has ever been released.
All in the name of transparency. Still in 2010, November, Wikileaks went on to post 251,000 US diplomatic cables, covering all interactions between US embassies from 1966 to 2010. Every message, from analysing nuclear threats to critiquing local governments, to high-level handling of intelligence assets and supporting of dictatorships, all the way down to embarrassing details of how they view other world leaders.
It's really almost apocalyptic to have 250,000 cables lost. It affects our relations with every country in the world and puts sources of information, not only government sources, but human rights activists and dissidents and others, at great risk.
In what they saw as an evolving method of release, Assange claimed the documents would be fed slowly and carefully, with confidential names blacked out. He even claimed to reach out to the State Department to help sort through the material.
The request was made to Assange to redact this material so these lives could be protected. He and his colleagues were pretty much contemptuous of this and said, well, you know, let the chips fall where they may. They weren't interested in negotiating, they were interested in revealing.
And they did reveal, with all 251,000 documents released online and uncensored for the world to see.
And there is nothing brave about sabotaging the peaceful relations between nations on which our common security depends.
So is this journalism? This was opening a fire hose of classified material to anyone who wanted it. Is it still in the public interest? Or had Assange assumed the role of provocateur?
So are you a revolutionary?
Well, we'll see. If we end up with a decent revolution, then perhaps others can make that judgment.
2010 draws to a dramatic close with an arrest warrant issued for Julian Assange from Sweden over rape and sexual assault allegations that he denies. Interpol follows up, issuing a red notice for his extradition. Assange hands himself into UK police, pleads his innocence and is granted bail. By 2012, though, the sexual assault case has gone all the way to the UK Supreme Court, which rules Assange should be extradited to Sweden for further questioning.
The extradition proceeding to Sweden, which is occurring in a very strange and unusual way, is actually an attempt to get me into a jurisdiction which will then make it easier to extradite me to the United States.
So he breaches bail and enters the Ecuadorian embassy. An idealistic stand for press freedom, or perhaps a distraction from a media crackdown at home, Ecuador's president grants diplomatic asylum to Julian Assange. And the US pushes ahead with its case against Chelsea Manning, the intelligence analyst who leaked the military material. She's charged under the country's Espionage Act, convicted and sentenced to 35 years jail. Julian Assange remained in refuge, granted asylum by the Ecuadorian government for the next 7 years. This patch of Ecuador in London is where he meets Stella Morris, the woman who'll become his wife, and fathers their 2 children. He remains inside, locked in his diplomatic sanctuary. While on the other side of the Atlantic, the US presidential race was reaching a crescendo.
Russia, if you're listening, I hope you're able to find the 30,000 emails that are missing.
Turns out Russia was listening. As highlighted in the Mueller report, almost immediately after this request, a hacking and phishing campaign was launched by Russian operatives against members of America's Democratic Party email accounts. 20,000 pages of emails, mostly stolen from the inbox of Clinton campaign chair John Podesta, were drip-fed out on WikiLeaks in the months leading up to the election.
As confirmed just today by WikiLeaks.
It's been amazing what's coming out on WikiLeaks. They want to distract us from WikiLeaks.
The wonder of WikiLeaks. WikiLeaks has done a job on her, hasn't it?
And while none of the emails were that explosive, it added to a narrative that Clinton was a calculated political operator with funding from big corporate donors. And that was seized upon by her opponent, who ultimately won out the general election. Julian Assange's role again called out as an act of espionage.
Can you tell the American people 1,000% you did not get it from Russia or anybody associated with Russia?
We can say, we have said repeatedly over the last 2 months that our source is not the Russian government and it is not a state party.
After the election, the new president tried to separate himself from Assange and Wikileaks.
I know nothing about Wikileaks. It's not my thing.
The new CIA director going further to call out the actions of Wikileaks and go after Assange.
Assange and his ilk make common cause with dictators today. Yes, they try unsuccessfully to cloak themselves and their actions in the language of liberty and privacy. But in reality, they champion nothing but their own celebrity. Their currency is clickbait. Their moral compass, non-existent. Their mission, personal self-aggrandizement through destruction of Western values.
In Ecuador, a new president there isn't so sympathetic to Assange's cause. Lenin Moreno's government sees him as a rude and expensive guest who's hampering their relationship with the US.
Han llevado la situación a un punto en que el asilo del señor Assange es insostenible e inviable.
By 2019, Assange is removed from the embassy by UK police, who arrest him on behalf of the US, before he's transferred to Belmarsh prison.
No one is above the law. Julian Assange is no hero. He is hidden from the truth for years and years, and it is right that his future should be decided in the British judicial system.
After conducting a comprehensive assessment, the evidence is not strong enough to form the basis of filing an indictment.
The Swedish investigation is dropped, and it's at this point the extent of the US charges are laid bare. 18 criminal charges, including obtaining, receiving and disclosing classified information. The obtaining part is a fairly low-level hacking charge and refers to a single count of Assange agreeing to help Private Manning break a password for a US Department of Defence computer, something they ultimately failed to achieve. But the receiving and disclosing parts make up the bulk of the charges, 17 of the 18 counts. And in this, Assange is accused of breaching the Espionage Act of 1917 by conspiring with Chelsea Manning and publishing the material online. The charges could see him jailed, effectively for life. The Espionage Act is intended to stop American military officials from recruiting or aiding the enemy during wartime. But this is an Australian civilian who was given these documents while in a foreign country. And as for the publishing of these classified documents, how do they prosecute him without prosecuting The Times, Post and Guardian for the same thing? Publishing stories based on the leaks after being given early access by Assange. But the US didn't view him as a journalist in the same way. The charges point to him being a hacker or data dumper, a digital pariah with a goal to discredit the US government.
The US government, in terms of its attack on WikiLeaks, has tried to construct a theory which, if permitted, will be the end of national security journalism, not just in the United States, but also about the United States.
Chelsea Manning says she will refuse to testify against Assange. She's now free after having her sentence commuted by Barack Obama.
Chelsea Manning has served a tough prison sentence.
Quiet diplomacy has been the approach of consecutive Australian governments.
There is nothing to be served by his ongoing incarceration, and I am concerned about Mr. Assange's mental health.
Julian Assange's support in Parliament crosses party lines.
This was always political. It remains political. I think the solution is political.
This Australian citizen who didn't commit a crime in the United States is in Australia.
Jailing an Australian citizen whose only crime was telling the truth and being a journalist.
And Joe Biden's planned visit to Australia presented an opportunity to plead his case. But the Biden visit was cancelled at the last minute, swamped by the US debt ceiling crisis. Julian Assange is almost out of legal options to stop his extradition to the US.
Enough is enough. This needs to be brought to a conclusion.
Yeah, to me, it's the sheer hypocrisy